What's up guys, Untitled Studios here, and today we're going to be doing the full review of the Fantom Fury, manufactured by Fantom Technologies, also known as Iona Appliances. Now, this machine is pretty interesting because this machine is one that I did technically do a review on a few years ago, but the problem is that that review wasn't really a very good, review, which is pretty important when you're doing a review. And what I mean by that is that video, I didn't really run the machine all that much. I didn't really talk about how much, or I should say, I didn't really talk about how good it was to use or its performance or how well it cleaned, if the features of it were good or anything really like that. It was more so just, oh hey, I got this Fantom, it's in great condition. Here's a couple little things I'm going to show you on it, and then we'll go on our merry way. But obviously, I have a few of these machines now, and this is one of two that I've actually fixed recently. I actually fixed this one about a year ago. I stripped it all the way down to the motor, completely cleaned out the inside of it, did work to the brush roll, fitted a new belt, a new headlight bulb, and overall the machine is in really good condition, with the only exception of this particular Fantom does have a busted lower cord clip. But other than that, this thing is still in pretty good condition, has all the attachments with it, and there's nothing physically wrong with it in terms of its ability to do what a vacuum is designed to do. So in that case, we're going to review it. Now, this is actually the worst condition Fantom out of all of the 12 amp Fantoms that I own, at least all the green ones. I have 3 of these green 12 amp Fantom Furies, and this model that you see in front of you is the most common model of the Fantom Fury that you will likely find in the wild, although that's not saying much, as the company Fantom Technologies went bankrupt back in 2001, and as a result, there was complete lack of any available parts to repair the machines that were already in the wild, and general support of the machine just dropped off completely. Now the good news is that the belt and the light bulb that you would get for these machines are off-the-shelf parts that you can still very easily find to this day. And as far as the one and only filter that this machine has, the Hepa filter that's on the exhaust of the machine, there is still plenty of new old stock filters floating around on eBay now. So if you have one of these and the motor sounds good and it runs and it's in decent condition, you can actually continue to use the machine, as the 3 most important things that you would need to keep the machine running, belts, headlight bulbs, and filters, the most expendable items, you can still find. Brush rolls, that's going to be a harder sell. And obviously brush rolls aren't going to last forever. The bearings for the brush roll are over-the-counter bearings. They use 626ZZ bearings. I think I got that right. And I actually just ordered a pack of those bearings online so I can rebuild a lot of these brush rollers. So while you can't find replacements, you can at least rebuild the brush rollers. And as long as your brush roll works and then the main expendables are out of the way, then you could in theory still use one of these things. But I wouldn't recommend it for obvious reasons. But that being said, if you did want to use one of these things, or if this review was somehow available to people 25, 30 years ago, then how well does the Fantom Fury work as a vacuum cleaner, at least compared to a lot of other vacuums that came out in the mid-90s? This machine, after all, was launched at the end of 1996, so this design is relatively old, and you got to think about it from the perspective of a vacuum that was out at that time. This would have been competing with a lot of direct air machines from the likes of Hoover, Eureka, and then a few higher end cleaner machines from Hoover, Eureka, Dirt Devil, etc. Keep in mind, at the time, Dyson was not on the market yet, and the reason why is because if you notice this bin setup, this is actually a dual cyclonic machine. And a lot of the early Dysons that came out in the United Kingdom actually had this design. In fact, this Fantom Fury is basically our American or North American equivalent to the Dyson DC-03, where it's a machine that is a lot lighter weight and the build quality isn't as good as some of the earlier machines, but the advantage is it's a lot lighter weight and it's a lot easier to push, pull, and store. So while it doesn't look that similar to the DC-03 other than the bin, it is basically the American equivalent to it. So out of all the Fantom uprights that you can use, this will be the lightest and most maneuverable one when you compare it to the Fantom Thunder and the Fantom Cyclone XT. So that is one thing, is that this does have a very good cyclonic system for the time because it's using Dyson's patent. Because James Dyson at the time actually licensed his patents to Iona Appliances, the company that manufactured these Fantoms, and gave him the license to his technology so that way he could use it. He also gave them licenses to the actual machine molds and designs themselves. So if Fantom wanted to release identical machines to Dyson's machines and give their own color to it, they very much can. In fact, they did do that with the Fantom Lightning, which is a canister vacuum that is nearly identical to the Dyson DC-02 in design, with the main upgrade being that it actually has an electronic power nozzle versus the British counterpart, which is just a straight suction canister. So a little bit of interesting backstory there, but obviously this video is primarily focusing on the Fury. So how is the Fury? Well, we'll go over the design of the vacuum real quick first. So looking at the front of it, we have the 12 amp moniker, which some of the earlier machines were actually 10 amps. I do have a 10 amp version of this machine. Here is the headlight right here on the front. It's a very thin headlight. There's very little for the light to actually get through. You can replace it with modern bulbs, and I will link a video in the description of the maintenance guide that I did on this machine. So if you want to see how to change the filter, change the belt, change the light bulb and all that, service the brush roller, that video will show you how to do that. But as far as this headlight right here, it takes one bulb, unlike the Fantom Thunder or Cyclone XT that took 2 headlight bulbs. This just has one bulb in the center of the cleaner. And on later versions of the Fantom Fury, like the Special Edition and the Limited Edition, as well as its very brief replacement, the Fantom Crosswind 200 XL, those machines have a much larger headlight window. And this base cover is designed a little bit differently, so the headlight has a bit more space to shine out. So the actual headlight on this isn't the most useful headlight in the world, but it is still better than nothing. So it is nice to have the headlights, especially because no Dyson in the States ever came with a headlight. But on this unit, the headlight is a little bit weak and wimpy, considering the fact that it's behind this colored window, and the fact that the light bulb doesn't have a lot of space to actually shine out. So it's not going to be the most effective headlight in the world, but it is at least there. One nice feature about the headlight is, unlike a lot of other machines at the time, like the Hoover Elites and Wind Tunnel, actually no, the Elites often had headlights on the base like this, but the Wind Tunnels that came later on, a lot of those had the headlights on the motor portion itself, which meant that the headlight wasn't even pointed at the floor. The nice thing about this machine is the headlight is on the actual base itself, so it is pointed at the floor when you're vacuuming, and it's not just up here where it's just going to be shining in a general direction. So that is a nice feature. Next to it, you have a 3-position height adjustment switch. Now, there is only 3 positions, and much like a lot of other height adjustments, it's a lot easier to move the knob if you tilt the machine back a little bit. So there's a low pile, a medium pile, and a high pile. So for my carpet, this headlight, or this height adjustment mechanism does stick out quite a fair bit. So generally speaking, you might have to put this on a bit of a higher setting than you might have to with some other machines, especially considering the fact that you only have 3 adjustments. But to me, 3 is kind of the bare minimum for a decent amount of height adjustments. It would be nice if it had like 5 or something. I do think more adjustments is generally better, but it is enough to adjust to the vast majority of carpeting that you would need to. Now, this is not designed to actually use the floor head on actual hard floors, and the reason why is because the rotating brush on the Fury and on the Thunder are always spinning as they are driven by a stretch belt. The Cyclone XT and the Lightning have separate brush roll motors, so they actually turn off when you put the machine upright, much like a Dyson. This machine does not have that feature. But what Fantom did that's really nice is they actually gave you a hard floor tool. So you just use the wand and attach the hard floor tool to the wand, and that's how you would clean the hard floors. And the hard floor tool actually rides on board, which is really nice. Now this hard floor tool is not the best quality hard floor tool, but it does get the job done. It has some rubber coated wheels on all four corners of it, and there's a small brush strip right here in the back. It also has a little suction slider right here, but I found that given the fact that this machine doesn't have very strong suction to begin with, and especially my particular machine that you see right here has weaker suction than all my other Furies because the actual motor housing has a crack in it. I did seal it with tape, but it still leaks a little bit of air. So the suction on this machine is not very strong. So this little suction slider right here doesn't really do anything. It's just another thing that can get worn out and leak suction through. So that's not really the best idea. And on later versions of these floor tools, they did actually remove this slider and just have it be a solid piece, which I think was the right move. Now looking at the other two attachments that ride on board, we have the Crevice Tool. Now this is actually a really, really nice Crevice Tool. It's nice and long, it's very skinny, and it's able to get into a lot of areas, and yet the opening, despite it being a skinny Crevice Tool, the opening isn't too short, so it doesn't really choke the suction as much as it could. So I do really like the Crevice Tool on this machine. It does a really good job. And we do have a little holder right here. So this holder is what allows you to store the floor tool on board the machine. If you don't have this holder or you lost it, which many people did, then you can't store the floor tool on the machine. Even if you want to just store, well actually, okay, so you can store the floor tool on the machine, but you would have to pick between storing the floor tool on the machine or the Crevice Tool. Although chances are, if you lost this adapter, you probably lost both of the tools with it. Then on this upper hook right here, we have the dusting brush. This is actually a really nice dusting brush. I do think the opening is too big, but the actual brushes are horsehair bristles and they're very nice and soft. It's not the best quality dusting brush. The bristles can still be a little bit rough. I still wouldn't dust a TV or anything like this, but any sort of furniture or anything else that you would dust, like a lampshade or a curtain, this will do perfectly fine on. Another attachment that you have as an option is the optional pet hair tool. Now this is basically Fantom's answer to an upholstery tool. Now this doesn't really fit on the dusting brush mount nearly as easily, but you can fit it on this bottom mount. So if you have the pet hair tool and the dusting brush, you could do that. But the pet hair tool actually did come with an adapter back in the day that would slide on top of the brush holder, so that way you could hold the brush on its holder and have the pet hair tool right next to it. Although that adapter wasn't built very well, and I've heard a lot of reports of people bumping the side of the vacuum into furniture and breaking that adapter. So it's not the best built thing in the world, but it is an option if you want to be able to hold all four tools on board. And this pet hair tool is pretty interesting because it has very stiff bristles, and it actually does a pretty good job at removing pet hair. Although I wish there weren't as much spaces in between the bristles. I wish they were a bit more dense. And there's a little part right here where you can actually slide off the bristles and just have a straight suction head. This to me looks like a much smaller version of a shop vac nozzle that you would see, like something you use for like wet pickup, although obviously this is a dry vac. But you can remove this as well. I don't really see any reason to, but it is an option. And of course that just slides right back on and clicks right into place. So that's the pet hair tool. Now, Fantom vacuums also had the option of a crevice brush, which is basically like this dusting brush, but it's much longer and bigger, very similar to what Dyson would eventually come out with the soft dusting brush. But that tool came out later in Fantom's life, and it's very rare and very hard to find. I would love to find one, but probably not going to. Fantom also had a hose extension that you could buy, and this would allow you to actually expand the actual reach of the hose. Now Fantom sold two different versions of the hose extension. This one, I believe this one is 7 feet, and they also sold a version that was 10 feet. And of course, in theory, you could daisy chain as many of these as you want, but you would obviously lose airflow in the process. But the nice thing is that with this extension hose, you actually can get all the way up to the top of your steps. Whereas with something like a Dyson, you generally miss out on the top upper 2 or 3 steps, which is something that I do really like about the Fantoms. Now granted, again, the airflow and the suction isn't that great, but it is enough to at least clean your stairs if you don't have super thick carpeted stairs. So usually on stairs, I would generally elect to use the floor tool. Now, one thing that is a bit odd is that in the case of the Fury and the Thunder, this hose doesn't stretch out nearly as much as it does on a Dyson. So you actually rely on the hose extension a lot more to get up into places, whereas with the Dyson, the hose stretches a lot more. But since you have the hose extension, it's not the biggest deal in the world. And on the Cyclone XT, they did fix this issue. The Cyclone XT has a much stretchier hose that does go a lot longer than it does on the Fury and the Thunder. Now, as far as the way that the hose wand actually clicks into place, it's identical to a very early Dyson. So if you look right here, there's just a button right here that you push and the wand pops straight out, and the wand is your handle. It's identical to a Dyson DC07. The only difference is there is no reversible wand. So much like you would see with a newer Dyson like a DC41 or a Ball Animal 2, this wand just simply stays on the exact way it was when you removed it, and you're designed to just hold the bridge between the hose cuff and the wand, and you're supposed to hold that part while you clean, which can be a bit awkward, but since it's something that Dyson has been doing on their newer machines, it feels very natural. And of course, the nice thing is that you actually do have the hose wand. Now, of course, you can't hold the handle, but it means that there isn't an extra handle that's sticking out of the machine. You just carry it with a carrying handle right here. And unlike a Dyson, the carrying handle doesn't double as the bin, so there's no real latch that you can accidentally push for this to pop off. It is held in by a relatively weak screw though, so if you are very rough with this handle, it could snap off. But as you can see, that right there is your hose wand. You actually do have a nice grip on the end of the handle, and it is bent in a certain way, so that way, very similar to a DC07, like I said. So it actually has a nice grip on it. And there's also a suction relief right here. There's a couple holes right here. So that way, if you do block off the end of this, it does bleed a little bit of suction right there to protect the motor. Now, all of your tools fit onto the wand just fine, including the 4 tool fits on very easily, and the other tools fit on as well. One thing that's really frustrating is that some of these tools fit on tighter, so they actually don't go all the way down to block off that gap that I mentioned, that air, that, whatever you call the suction relief valve. It's not really a valve, but these holes to bleed off suction. So if you don't put the tools on all the way, it will leak a little bit of suction out of that. So you got to kind of look and make sure that you put these on all the way. One other thing that I found that's really frustrating about the Fantoms is that you can remove the hose, and you can put the attachments on the end of the hose, just like a Dyson, but it's not nearly as easy. And the reason why is because not all of these tools are designed the same way. Now that sounds a bit strange because they're all the same fitting, they all fit onto the wand just fine. But one thing I don't like is that if you look at the ends of these, the end of the pet hair tool, the end of the dusting brush, and especially the end of the floor tool all have flat edges. And they don't actually sit into the hose very easily. You have to actually twist them onto the hose because this collar is a malleable rubber material. So the Crevice Tool has a rounded edge, so this allows the Crevice Tool to fit on here just fine. It's still kind of a hassle to get it on. You have to really fight it, but since it's at least curved, you can kind of twist it on, and now you can use the Crevice Tool on the end of the hose just fine. And since it is friction fit, it fits in there really securely, so the tools aren't going to fall off very easily, and there's no clips to break. But there is a button right here, but it doesn't really do much. But when you're trying to put any of the other tools on, since it has a straight edge, it's a lot harder to put those tools on, and that's really a shame because that does kind of hurt the usability of the attachments, because you have to get it on there just right to get the tools onto the end of the hose. Now, and it really just does depend on whether or not you happen to be lucky and get them on. Like this time the brush went on relatively easily, but there are some times when I'll wrestle with it for like 2 minutes and I cannot get the brush on the end of the hose. And it's very inconsistent and it's a little bit bizarre. And obviously if you try to only use all the attachments on the wand, then when you're trying to clean something like a couch, it gets a little bit awkward. And the actual hose extension doesn't make a difference because the end of it is the exact same as the stock hose. So you have the same problem with the extension hose. In fact, in my case, it's actually a little bit harder to get the attachments on the end of the extension hose versus the main hose. And if we take the pet hair tool, again, we can just barely get it on there. And there we go, now the pet hair tool's on. And now you have a pretty good way to clean your couches and whatnot. In fact, just for me, setting the pet hair tool on the carpet, it managed to get a little bit of hair caught in the bristles. So that is a little bit frustrating. You have to kind of wrestle with the attachments to get them on the end of the hose, but they're perfectly fine to get on the end of the wand. And of course, when you're done, you just stick, ooh, careful. Yeah, you gotta be careful not to puncture the hose. You just put the wand right back on and snap it right into the top, just like a Dyson. And then of course, once you're done, I have to get up because my side is cramping. Then you can snap all the attachments right on board the machine. So in my case, I'll put the adapter on here just like this. Crevice tool, just like that. Floor nozzle goes on just like that. And dusting brush goes on just like that. And of course, these I'll have to set aside. So that allows you to put all the attachments right on the end of it, right on the machine pretty easily. Although one thing to note is that the floor nozzle is designed to go on this way, but it does stick out a little bit. So whenever you try to go to set the machine down to do something with the brush roll, you want to make sure to pull this out of the way so that way you're not putting pressure on this and potentially breaking it. One way you could also get around that is just before you do something like lay it down, you can pull the tool out or put it in the opposite direction so that way this sticks out forward. But then of course you can potentially get it caught on something. So you just got to kind of be careful with that. And of course, if you would like to just store the floor tool separately, there's nothing stopping you from doing that as well. So you do have those options. And while that is a little bit annoying in some instances, and it can be a little bit inconvenient, it's still not something I'm necessarily complaining about because the alternative is not having the floor tool on board at all. And that's something that no other vacuum that I'm really aware of has other than a canister. So it's still nice that it has an option, and obviously you're not forced to use it. You can take off that adapter and store the floor tool separately. So in my opinion, it's not really much of an issue. And like I mentioned before, there is a carrying handle right on the top of this, so it's very easy to pick up. And it doesn't weigh too incredibly much, although I forgot to weigh it before I did this review. So I will actually weigh it real quick and see how much it weighs. So I just weighed this machine on a scale on 3 separate occasions, and all 3 times it rang up as 17.4 pounds, the exact same weight as the Dyson Ball Animal 2. So it's not an overly heavy vacuum cleaner. And while it is the lightest Fantom, it is still kind of heavy, but you know, it's still not out of the ordinary or something that is obscenely heavy, something like a wind tunnel self-propel or a Kirby. So, and also, just so you know, that weight was exactly the way you see it here, with an empty bin and with all the attachments on board, but not the cord. So with the cord, it probably weighs 18 pounds. So carrying it up and down stairs isn't the easiest thing in the world, but it's not hard either. The hardest part about carrying up the stairs is just since this base sticks out a good amount, it can be a little bit awkward. But obviously, in my case, I wouldn't have to worry about that if I was using one of these because I have 2 of them, so I could just have one upstairs and one downstairs, and then use the one downstairs on the stairs. It's a lot of stairs. So, and speaking of which, like I mentioned earlier, with the hose extension, the vacuum goes all the way upstairs without a problem. Without the hose extension, it is a few stairs less than the Dyson. You can get about halfway comfortably, and if you really stretch the hose, you can get up to about 9 steps, but that's still not great because obviously you're stretching the hose out a good amount, and there's no reason to, because with the hose extension, you can get all the way up the stairs. In fact, I can leave the machine at the bottom of my stairs, and with the hose extension, not only get all the way up to the top step, but also clean up in the corner above the staircase and dust the cobwebs out of that corner above the top step. So the hose extension does a great job at making this thing reach all the way up to the top of the stairs, even better than something like a Dyson, because the combined hose length of the extension with the normal hose actually makes it longer than a Dyson. So with that, you get a good amount of reach with this machine, and that definitely is very, very nice. And of course, you know, if you are familiar with a Dyson, this is exactly as you would expect. Just press the button and the wand pops right out. I will say that if you do have the Fantom Thunder, which I will review separately, it also pulls out in this identical fashion. The only difference is that the button is actually on the machine, so you have to push the button on the machine and then pull the wand out. Or what I would usually do is I would just push the button on the machine with the back of my palm and then grab the wand out in one swift motion. But on the Fury, the button is actually on the wand just like a Dyson DC07, so it pulls out exactly how you would expect. In fact, the design of the wand the wand button, I should say, looks identical to an early Dyson if you look at them side by side. It's held in with a spring, and it's overall very good quality. I've never seen one of these buttons on these wands fail. The one thing that I do see fail on these all the time is the lower cord hook. So 2 of my Fantoms that I own actually had busted lower cord hooks, and this is the only one where I haven't replaced it. The other one, I managed to find a hose with a good clip, and I swapped it out. So that is pretty much that. One other thing that some people might be wondering is, well, how do you actually recline it into the vacuuming position? Because a Dyson, you generally just put your foot on the front of it and recline it back. Or if it's a newer Dyson ball, you just pull the machine back and it automatically pops up into floor mode. This one, there actually is a release pedal right here on the back, and it spans the entire back of the machine. And there's a pedal on either side, which I really like. So whether you're left-footed or right-footed, or whether you want to push one closest to you or furthest from you, doesn't matter. You can just push the button and the machine reclines. Now, generally what I like to do is I actually like to alternate which button I push each day, so that way I'm not putting uneven wear on that bar mechanism. Because while I've never seen one of these bars actually flat out fail, I have seen where some of these Fantoms that are really worn out, where the bar isn't as strong as it normally is, because it is made out of metal and it actually spans the entire length of both of the wheels. So it's built very well. But after 20 or so years, I do sometimes see these machines get to the point where if you pull the machine back and you put a lot of pressure on it, it might pop down. Or I've seen some of these happen where you barely have to push on it and they'll recline. But this one is still very snappy, no pun intended. You can see it has a lot of snappiness to it. If you do take one of these apart, I would recommend trying to lubricate this a little bit so it's a little bit smoother. You can tell on this side, this one feels a little bit funky, but on this side it feels perfectly fine. So that is something that I've noticed, where if someone pushes on one of these buttons all of the machine's life, it'll kind of wear unevenly. And you can actually push in the middle too, because you can just push directly on the bar, and that will move the entire mechanism back, because it's all one mechanism that spans the entire back of the machine. So if you want to push it down in the middle so you're not giving uneven pressure to the machine, that is something you can do. It's just not obviously, highlighted with a button. So that is really nice. And that also means that whenever you have the machine reclined, it's automatically down and you can go all the way flat to the floor. In fact, this floor tool is the biggest thing keeping it from going all the way flat, and the fact that the head does pop up a little bit. So you can get about this low pretty comfortably before it starts to not kind of topple up on itself. But this is perfectly fine. For getting underneath coffee tables and all that, this does perfectly fine. And a lot better than a lot of other bagless machines, because it does have a relatively slim forward profile. It's still much, fatter this way than a bag machine, but since the actual cyclone and canister is a lot thinner and a lot further into the design, it's able to get underneath stuff a lot easier than most other bagless machines, which I do really appreciate. Even modern bagless machines don't get under stuff as well as this does. Other than something that is as thin as this, something like a Hoover Air Steerable would get pretty decently underneath furniture. But one other thing that's really nice is I did comment about the wedge shape of this power head earlier, and how that is a little bit funky when you're carrying it upstairs. But the one thing that I really like about it is that it means that the brush roll is very, very forward on the design. So it means that you can actually kind of get underneath at least get, about this far underneath some low furniture. So for example, if I turn this over, this is where my fiance's chair is. Please excuse the mess. a lot of machines, for example, this little crack right underneath the chair. You see this little gap right here where there's a bit of a gap right underneath the chair? A lot of machines can't get into here, but this actually can, and I really like that. So most machines will stop right there, but I can actually go a little bit further and get underneath it. Again, it's kind of hard to show on camera, but without having to actually open up the footrest portion, I forgot what that's called, you can actually get all the way underneath this. I mean, and you can even go a little bit further. It'll push the chair up a little bit, but you can go realistically as far as you would need to go, because obviously you're not really going to be vacuuming underneath the portion where the actual stand is, because dirt doesn't really accumulate there because it's covered. So that is one thing that I do really like about the Fury, is that for a bagless machine, it can get into a good amount of places, and especially considering this is a really old design, it's something that I really, really do like about it. So, and then we'll go ahead and move on to one other portion, which is obviously the filter and bin maintenance, and then we'll get into running this machine, because there's not really much else to talk about. And we will do the pickup test as well. So, we have your basic dual cyclone setup that I mentioned earlier. We have the Hepa filter right here on the side. So this Hepa filter is pretty interesting. It's a certified Hepa filter. The very early versions of this machine did not have a Hepa filter, and a lot of those were unbranded on the side as well. But by the time the 12 amp Fury came out, this was a standard feature. So the way that you access this is you just slide this caddy up. If you've ever replaced a Hepa filter on a Dirt Devil Vision, it's basically identical to that in terms of design. And then most filters that you buy, at least the genuine Fantom filters, have a nice little tab right here that you can use to pull out the filter super easily. And obviously, if that tab is not in place, you can very easily there's enough gap right here where you can just grab the filter itself and pull it straight out. So it has a big, thick rubber gasket around the entire perimeter of the filter. And assuming your filter's in good shape and this gasket is still there, it seals very well. And that's another thing that I really like, is that the gasket is on the filter. So you replace the gasket every time you replace the filter. Now granted, this is a mid-90s vacuum, so don't go fooling yourself into thinking this is going to be a sealed system or that's going to filter better than anything on the market nowadays, or even anything on the market from, 7 years after this machine came out. Every Dyson that's ever existed in the US will filter better than this. Every Shark that's existed in the US, at least every Shark Navigator, will filter better than this machine. And obviously any modern bagged machine will filter much better than this. But here's the thing. This thing has no pre-motor filter. Yeah, so my Dyson Kinetic Big Ball Animal Plus Allergy, which is a machine that Dyson has made it very, very clear, because they want you to know that the cyclonic technology in that machine is so good that they eliminated the pre-motor filter. The only filter you have to replace is in the Hepa filter. So the only filter you change is the one on the exhaust of the vacuum. In fact, they don't even go that far. They pretend like there's no filter at all, which there obviously is. This machine did that. In fact, the original Fantom did that. The original Fantom, whose design dates back to 1989, doesn't have a pre-motor filter. In fact, the original Fantom didn't have a filter at all, which obviously that's not good because you're not filtering out the motor carbons. But in the case of this machine, the dual cyclonic technology does filter out to very fine dust, even without a filter. Now, is it good that this thing doesn't have a pre-motor filter? No. And obviously Fantom knew that, because with the Lightning and the Cyclone XT, they did add a pre-motor filter. So this machine does unfortunately let a lot of fine dust through the motor and into this Hepa filter. In fact, there's a lot of people that speculate in sort of a conspiracy theory-esque way that Fantom intentionally turned down the idea of putting pre-motor filters in their machines so they could sell people more Hepa filters and sell people more service tune-ups as a result of their motor bearings drying out as a result of the dust, and their Hepa filters clogging with dust, and then needing to change these large, expensive cartridges. Now, I'm not sure how much I buy that, because Fantom did add pre-motor filters to their designs after Dyson told them to basically implement it. The only difference is they kept the Hepa filter instead of using Dyson's Mima filter, which Dyson allegedly wanted them to use the MEMA filter and abandon HEPA. But that doesn't make very much sense because even at the time, they had Dysons on the market in the UK that had HEPA filters. So I don't know where that argument came from, but that's what I keep hearing from people that were involved with Fantom back in the day. But that's sort of the controversy, so to speak. Now, one thing that a lot of people did complain about back in the day, rightfully so, is that these filters, because there was no pre-motor filter, they did fill up with dust, and they needed replaced on a somewhat frequent basis. Fantom recommended that you replace these filters annually, and these filters would often be around $60 to $75, which in late 90s, early 2000s money is quite a good amount of money. So, I mean, hell, that's even a good amount of money today for a filter, let alone back then. That'd be the equivalent of like $120 for a filter, which, considering you can buy a whole vacuum, you can buy 2 vacuums for that price, does sound kind of ridiculous. And yeah, it was. Fantom was way overcharging for these filters, but in their defense, at least it is a pretty massive filter that you wouldn't have to change very often. Now, this one looks like it could be changed, and I do have a spare, but right now this is the filter that I have in this machine. In fact, this filter is a genuine Fantom filter that was manufactured on the 45th week of 1999, so this definitely could do to be changed. But it just pops right back in the side just like that, and it slides right down. So because there is no pre-motor filter, I would highly recommend not vacuuming up anything explicitly fine as far as dust into this machine. No drywall dust, no flour, even though they did show flour in the Fantom infomercials. I wouldn't recommend going out of your way to suck up a lot of fine dust. But as far as the fine dust that this will suck up during normal household vacuuming, it'll be fine. Will it get covered in dust after 5 years? Sure. But as long as you are relatively nice with it, or if you do actually get it serviced every 5 or so years, you should be okay. But again, it wasn't the best recipe for longevity. But at the same time, back in the day, people need to remember that there were other machines on the market, like the Dirt Devil Vision, where it had a big filter in the dust cup and it still let just as much, if not more, dirt through to the final filter as the Fantom does. And the Eureka Whirlwinds in particular were very notorious for letting way too much dust through the motor and actually killing the motors and putting the fans off balance because debris was getting into the motors and completely drying out the bearings. If you ever had an old vacuum that sounded like a chainsaw, even when there was no brush roll attached, that's probably why. So it really is not that much different than what you would see on the market at the time. And you kind of got to cut it some slack because it was the time brand new technology. And it is kind of odd that this machine doesn't have a pre-motor filter, and sure, it wasn't the best, but it was adequate for what you would expect at the time in terms of filtration. But yet Dyson to this day can't really seem to get filterless design right. Now, don't get me wrong, the kinetic technology actually does work, and I will talk about that in my kinetic big ball review, and it does let less fine dust through than this rudimentary 2-cyclone system does, but it's still not perfect. But then again, even a vacuum with a filter isn't perfect either, but still, a little filter somewhere in this design would have been nice. But as far as emptying the bin, since that is most maintenance you're going to do throughout the majority of its life, there is a max line right up here. The max line is right before the cyclone starts, but I recommend emptying it a little bit further down because the way that this works is you actually don't remove the cyclone from the machine. It's actually a bit bizarre. You actually leave the cyclone on the machine. You just simply pull this little lever right here and the bin pops right out. And that's it. The cyclone remains on the machine, which in some ways is bad because it means that any dust that has collected on the cyclone will now drop down onto the base of the machine. So generally speaking, you kind of have to set a damp rag down here and kind of wipe off the cyclone every time you empty the bin, and set a little rag down here so that way any of that dust is caught, and then wipe it down with a disinfecting wipe when you're done. And also wipe down the corner of this and wipe down the gasket on this bin too, because a lot of dust will get on this gasket and get all over the bin. It is kind of messy. But the one thing that I do like about this is because the bin doesn't have any sort of latch and it's just a cup that you dump, it means you can control how you get rid of the dirt a lot better than something like a Dyson where the flap just drops out of nowhere. And this, you can actually kind of stick it all the way down into your trash can, and you can tap it because there is an inner cyclone here that a lot of fine dust does collect into. So you can tap that, and then a lot of the fine dust will pop out of this secondary cyclone. So it is kind of similar to a very early Dyson where fine dust does get into this middle chamber. And then also lining this up is a little bit tricky, but if you kind of look at the top of this, just to make sure this gasket and this seal is lined up, and then just kind of, wiggle it on and click it into place. See this, you can kind of hear, it doesn't always like to line up properly, and it can be a little bit tricky to do. See, and sometimes it just doesn't want to do it. There we go. Once you hear it actually snap into place, that's when you know it's on. It is very easy to put this bin on improperly, but once you can kind of grab it, the side of it, and pull it a little bit and it's not budging, that's when you know it's on all the way. And again, you want to make sure this is sealed, because again, this is not a sealed system by modern standards, so there is some dust escaping the machine before it actually returns to the air through the whole filtration system. So again, if you have allergies, you shouldn't be using any vacuum that's this old. I don't care what it is. But, and let alone a bagless machine that's this old. But still, I do trust the filtration on this machine more than I would a Dirt Devil or Eureka of the time. And especially of any direct air machine, because any direct air machine is going to have worse filtration than a bypass machine in the vast majority of circumstances. So, with that in mind, we are going to go ahead and do a pickup test real quick on both carpets and hard floors. We'll run this for a little bit longer, and then we'll go ahead and finish this up. So, in traditional Intelitech Studios fashion, we are testing with potato flakes. It's generally the only thing that I use for a pickup test because in the case of both carpets and hard floors, you don't really need to vacuum up large coarse debris with your machine because that's the kind of thing that you could just pick up yourself. At least that's how I feel about it. So it's really going to be fine debris that you can't really pick up by hand that you're going to need to use your vacuum for. So in my case, we do have it on the highest carpet pile setting. And one thing to note is that the suction path on this machine is slightly off center, but it actually is a lot closer to center than we do see with a lot of other machines. Obviously, it's not centered like it is on a newer Dyson ball, but it's about equally as on center as it is like an older Dyson, like a the DC14. So we're going to go ahead and do the pickup test. Okay, so one thing I noticed with this Fantom is that you do have ingest bars on the bottom base assembly, and this Fantom is one of the few machines where with the pickup test with the potato flakes, it really accentuates the lines that it would otherwise be leaving behind, and also the line on the belt too, obviously. So, but as long as, since the actual ingest bars are really thin, you can tell that with me not being perfectly straight on the way back and me kind of accidentally going at a little bit of an angle, that did get what it otherwise would have left. And if we look, let's see. Okay, there's a potato flake here. Let's shake this up. Let's push this back a little bit and see if there's, okay, there's a flake there. There's 2 flakes there. Another flake there. Now keep in mind, I did take like one or two extra passes. I meant to do the same thing that I always do, where I do one pass, like one forward and back, and then I check it. So that's my bad. But Yeah, there's a couple on the side here. So that's really not bad. Like it, and keep in mind, this is actually the worst performing out of all the Furies that I have. All the other Furies that I have better brush rolls in it than this one does. This one's a little bit worn out. But there are a few flakes, but not a lot. There's only a couple left. I'd say there's probably like 6 flakes left, maybe 6 or 7 in total. Okay, 8. I found another one. But yeah, so... Oh, 9. Okay. I was sitting on one. So yeah, if I run my fingers along the carpet, there are a few flakes that pop out. But it's not too bad. It really didn't do a bad job. To me, it looked like it did a little bit better than the Boss Power Plus that I just did a review on. And that one has a lot more obvious agitation to it. So that is one thing that I love about the brush rolls in the Fantoms, as well as the Amway Clear Track, is that these do a good job at deep cleaning, but the brush rolls aren't overly aggressive on carpet, because there are vacuums that clean well on carpets but also don't tear up the carpet like these Fantoms. But then there's also vacuums that perform really well on carpets, like the newest ball Dysons, like the Animal 2 and the Multifloor 2, and a lot of Riccar machines. But those almost agitate too much, and they have a tendency to tear up fragile carpet. So this does a perfectly respectable job at picking up the fine materials. And also keep in mind, I did just do the demos of the Shark Freestyle, and that did leave a lot of these flakes behind. So some of those very well could be from that test as well. I probably should have reset this carpet before I did this test, but still, that's perfectly adequate in my book. And if I saw that much surface debris, I would obviously pass over it a few extra times just to make sure I got all of it. And this would do a perfectly respectable job. In fact, I will clean up the rest of this real quick. Like I said, I do need to rebuild the brush roll in this machine because the brush roll is starting to make a buzzing noise. But that being said, let's grab the floor tool and do this test on bare floors. Alright, here we are on my hard floor, and we've got a nice little mess of potato flakes. So, in my case, I'm going to put the floor tool on with the handle pointed downwards, and I'm going to make sure this valve is closed, but it really is loose. It might actually benefit if I try to tape it down. But you know what? I'm going to see how well it does as is. But keep in mind, this floor tool is a little bit faulty. So, and combined with this not having the best suction, that's probably the worst showing that you would see of one of these Fantom Furies on hard floors. But with that said, we're going to give it a try anyways. I'm going to find a way to clamp this down. But there we go. That'll do the trick. All right. So, give this a run. And obviously, since the brush roll does continue to rotate in this mode, you do want to make sure that the brush roll is not over something that can get caught into it. So. Alright, now I'm generally used to doing this test with uprights and not canisters, which effectively I was using this in a canister mode. So it's kind of hard for me to like do a forward and backward pass because obviously canister nozzles are designed to be lift up, so it's just kind of snowplowing everything at first. So I just kind of did it the way you naturally would. And again, I just did a few other tests as well with this. Yeah, there are a few flakes. You can see there's a couple flakes on my fingers. So not perfect. This is certainly not the best hard floor tool there is. But I mean, you know, not the greatest, but I can't imagine that a lot of machines would do that well on bare floors. Or I should say a lot of uprights. But then again, this isn't canister mode, so regardless, it did leave a few flakes behind, which, just like I mentioned in my Shark Navigator Freestyle review, it's a bare floor. There should be no excuse for picking up everything off of a bare floor. If you're talking about a fine material, you should have enough suction to pick it up. And who knows, maybe if I did this with a better quality floor tool, or if I had taped off the suction valve on the floor tool, and if this machine had a little bit more suction to begin with, like my other Furies do, maybe it would have done better. But as is, this Fury that I chose to test did do a relatively okay, but still slightly disappointing job on the bare floor. So, just like on the carpet, we're going to see if we can try this again and pick up what all is left. Alright, removing the attachment. I don't see any evidence of potato flake in the floor tool, so that's good. So yeah, something stuck in the wand either. So, again, not the best on bare floors, but could do worse. Certainly still has suction than any direct air machine that would have been competing with it at the time, like a Hoover Elite or a Dirt Devil Impulse. But who knows? Maybe we'll test those one of these days and see if that claim holds true. So, that's pretty much that. Alright, so after that pickup test, I'm going to discuss a few more notes about this machine, and then we'll run it one last time on the carpet, and we'll get out of here. So, this particular machine is pretty interesting in the sense that when this machine was new, it would have been competing in a similar sort of price range with a lot of premium bagged machines. And I say premium, not like SIBO or Miele type of premium, but, you know, box store premium, because obviously this was effectively a box store machine, and you did see this in a lot of different stores. In fact, the orange version of this was a Walmart exclusive. Yeah, not the blue. Makes a ton of sense, doesn't it? So this would have been competing with machines like the Eureka Excalibur and the Dirt Devil MVP, Ultra MVP, I mean, and something like the Eureka later on is something like the Hoover Wind Tunnel self-propelled. And now, I've owned all of those machines. In fact, two of those machines I own right now. One of them, I own the non-self-propelled version, and the self-propelled I have owned a few times over the years of the wind tunnels. And personally, if I was shopping in, when did this come out? This one is 2000. But if I was in like 1999 and I was shopping for a new machine in that price range, in like the sub to mid $200 price range, I might be a little bit off with some of those other machines. Some of them might be a little bit more, a little bit less, but about that price range. I think the wind tunnel self-propel would be actually like closer to 300. But still, comparing all those machines to this, if I was shopping for a machine back then, I would have picked this. At least if I know what I know now, and having owned all those machines and owning most of them right now, I would have picked this. Now granted, the non-self-propelled wind tunnel is also a really nice machine. And that would have obviously been better than this in quite a few ways. It would have had slightly better build quality, would have been a little bit lighter and have a lot more suction and better filtration since it would be a bag machine that's bypass. So, and that machine would have just come out at that time, if I remember correctly. Obviously, the Hoover collectors and Eureka Dirt Devil collectors can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but this is just going based off my memory. So, I think that if I was shopping for a machine, let's ignore the non-self-propelled wind tunnel, because that I think I very well could have picked over this. But this, compared to a lot of those other machines, my pick is this. And the reason why is because it's lighter weight, the build quality is much better. It's entirely possible that that a lot of those machines just don't feel as good because the plastic is kind of aged poorly. But assuming that the build quality of all the ones that I've tried now are what they were back then, or at least close to it, then this would have better build quality. Now this still isn't perfect. Like I said, the pedal on the back can sometimes wear out, and the biggest problem with these in terms of their actual design is this base assembly. This entire base assembly is very, very thin plastic, and the brush roll rides very close to the edge, which is good for edge cleaning, and it has this nice soft bumper, which is also good for that. But as a result, the metal end caps on the brush roller do sometimes warp and cause damage to the plastic housing. And I do have a couple of these where the plastic housing down here is actually cracked, and obviously that's not good. So this machine is prone to cracking down here because all of these parts, especially the part that the top cover hinges onto when you go to change the belt, is very, very thin plastic. So it is very prone to breaking. And if you find one of these in the wild nowadays, chances are a lot of this plastic is cracked, and you'll easily tell that because this bumper on the front will be loose because there will be no plastic for it to sit into. So that is a big problem with these machines. But also, the actual machine when you're using it feels a lot more sturdy than the aforementioned Dirt Devil, Eureka, and Hoover, because that's on the bottom of the machine. The part that you actually hold still feels very sturdy. And obviously, if you want something that's built even better, you can go with the Thunder, which was way heavier and way more cumbersome and borderline annoying to work with. But it is built like a tank, since that machine was essentially a commercial machine with a consumer-grade cord slapped on it. One other quirk of this machine is that there is no cord protector, so that's a bit annoying. I've never seen these cords split, but it is annoying. There is an option that you can get with this machine where there is a cord clip that you can remove and install onto the handle. That'll let you clip the cord to it. That's a very nice feature. I've heard some people complain about that and say that doesn't make any sense because you obviously have to take the cord out of the clip to use the wand. But why would you complain about that? Because the alternative is not having it, and there's nothing stopping you from either ignoring that clip or just taking it off entirely, which is what I've elected to do because I put it on one of my other Fantoms. But you have a cord clip that can attach right here, and you can keep the cord out of the way. And while you're using it as an upright, it works very well. No Dyson has ever had that function, and there's some Sharks that have had that function too, and those machines, just like this, you would have to actually pull it off, pull the cord out of the clip in order to use the wand. So, but it was an option that these had. Also, these do have fluff traps and cleanout ports in the back. The cleanout port is the same as every Fury. There's a little tab right here. I'll move the cord out of the way. There's a little tab right here, and then this entire thing pops down. So if you get something jammed in here, it's very easy to clear it out, and I do really like that. The fluff trap is above on this model, but there are some models where the fluff trap is right here and you pull it out. I think that is a little bit better, but there is that. There's also some versions of the Fury that have a reset button right here, a thermal reset in case the machine overheats. But in these newer units, it's just built into the motor, so the motor automatically kicks off whenever it overheats, and there's no reset button. You just wait a half an hour to an hour and then turn it back on whenever you want to. In fact, I know that for a fact because when I first got this machine, it was tripping the thermal reset because the dust that was in the motor was actually overheating it a little bit and causing the motor to throw sparks, which is not good, but also not atypical of machines from back then. So with that said, that's pretty much everything that you would realistically need to know about the Fantom Fury. And my biggest complaints with it are the, still by modern standards, lackluster suction. My other biggest complaint is the proprietary tool fitting. This tool fitting is much thinner than a lot of other tool fittings, so you can't buy your own attachments. And as far as I know, Fantom never made an adapter, so these attachments are proprietary. So if you lose these attachments, nothing you can do. I have not found any sort of attachment that can replace these and fit onto the wand or the hose. So these are their own custom fitting. They're much thinner than a lot of other fittings, much narrower in circumference. So if you lose these attachments, you're screwed. So not much to say about that. I don't like that, but the actual quality of the attachments themselves, other than the design flaw with how they fit onto the hose, are pretty good. I do still think that the floor tool leaves a lot to be desired, and the dusting brush could be a little bit smaller, but other than that, there's really not much to complain about as far as the attachments other than those flaws. So despite those issues, I really do like this machine, and there is a reason why this is my favorite vacuum of all time, and it is for many of those reasons, because it's very similar to a Dyson, but it doesn't have a lot of the design flaws. Not design flaws per se, but a lot of the quirks that a lot of early Dysons have. There's no clutch to worry about, it's just a basic stretch belt. You have a headlight, you have a decently lightweight machine, you have a very nice looking machine. The look of this machine has aged very, very well compared to every other machine from the 90s. Like, can you name a machine from the mid-90s that looks more modern than this? I don't think you can, other than maybe a SIBO, since SIBOs have never really changed in their design anyways. But like, I love the way this looks. I love just the overall styling of it. The black, sort of the black glossy design. It does collect scratches. I don't like that, and it can collect dust. But other than that, it looks really nice. The dual cyclonic logo right on the front. Some of these early Fantoms were actually just stickers, but this one actually is printed on. Overall, I just really do like the styling of it, and it's very nice to use. Considering how heavy it is, it's still pretty decent to push and pull on the carpet. It's still more awkward than a good amount of other machines. It is a little bit heavier in the hand, and the height adjustment is a little bit funky. But other than that, I still really like this machine. Also, it has a 30-foot cord, which vacuums today still don't reliably have 30-foot cords. They are still selling $200, $250, $300 vacuums. Shark. From companies that still have 25, 26-foot cords. Like, that is ridiculous. This has a 30-foot cord. Really like that. Excellent feature. Also, I forgot to mention this, but the Hepa Filter cartridge, please excuse the ambulances. Well, I hope that person's okay. Anyways, so there is a little tab right here that'll actually pop out and tell you when the filter actually needs change. Now granted, by the time this pops out, your filter desperately needs change. So I generally think that this isn't sensitive enough, but it is there. So to your average consumer that's not paying attention to these, it will tell you whenever it needs a new filter. So that is also another really cool feature that doesn't get enough credit. I really do feel like these machines don't get enough credit for what they were. And I feel like the fact that the company eventually got greedy and went bankrupt is kind of used as an opportunity to trash the entire machine, the entire brand, as well as their association with Dyson. and their not so favorable, reputation within the vacuum repair industry. But I still don't think these don't get enough appreciation for what they are. Is this machine perfect? No. And even with the fact that this does work very well, I still don't really want to use it over other machines, although this is essentially my comfort vacuum. So whenever I'm having a bad day and I want to just do something relaxing, I love the way the motor sounds on this. I love the warm air that comes out of the exhaust. I love the smell of it. That's probably just old dust, but still, I love the smell of it. And it's just very therapeutic for me. So Fantoms will always have their place in my collection, and they're getting harder and harder to find nowadays. So they're getting rarer and rarer, especially the very early units, or the very late ones that weren't in production for very long. I'm still looking for a Fantom Crosswind 200 XL, which is the updated version of this with a single cyclone, a bin that pops off, and it's like in a tannish grayish blue color that I really like. But I'm probably never going to find one. But still, one can dream. So anyways, this was my full, in-depth, comprehensive, no detail left out review of the Iona Fantom Fury. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this absolute crazy review in terms of this machine. And there just really aren't enough Fantom videos out there. So I'm hoping that this will be kind of a neat little gateway. So if you're watching this and you found one of these in a thrift store, or you found one on the side of the road and you didn't know what it was and you picked it up and you found this video and curious about it, let me know. I would love to hear your stories. And if you have a Fantom I want, I'll probably want to buy it off you. That's a lie. I will definitely want to buy it off you. So anyways, this was Untitled Studios signing out with reviewing one of my favorite vacuums of all time. Although, again, it's still not perfect, but it has its charm. Anyways, again, Untitled Studios signing out. I'll see you guys in the next review. I hope you enjoyed this one and found it helpful and found it informative, this lovely retrospective review of this lovely retrospective machine. And I will see you guys in the next video. And I hope you all have a good one. Peace. Also, if I remember correctly, this machine has a sticker on it that says Fantom.com. That doesn't exist anymore. Also, it has a Fantom helpline, 1-800-668-9600. Last I called that number, it redirected me to the Shark helpline. For those curious, the reason why is because the Fantom name was actually acquired by Europro, the company that is now Shark Ninja, when Fantom went bankrupt. So you will see the Fantom name on some newer machines that do not have the cyclonic technology. A lot of those machines are referred to as something like the Fantom Thunderbolt or the Fantom Twister. I have reviewed the latter of that machine, but just be aware that those are not the same as this machine. They're completely different. In fact, those are just rebatched Sanyo vacuums. But they are another interesting piece of Fantom history. So, I think that's it. Also, I do know if you do call that number and ask about a Fantom, the people on the phone line will have no idea what you're talking about, and they will look at you like you're crazy. I know it's over the phone, but I can tell they will look at you like you're crazy. So, fun fact. All right, that's that. Peace.